Hey, I'm Dawn Marie Solis with Neuro Awesome Life, and I am here with Grace McGrath and Kyra Kronberg. And full disclosure, I've known Grace since she was a little girl. Uh, and it has been a nonstop privilege, an absolute nonstop privilege. Uh, Brilliant and motivated and passionate. Beautiful inside and out, handsome inside and out. Just really, really, really enjoy this human being, and so glad that they're willing to talk to me on video. Kyra and I just met like for half a second a month or so ago, and I got so excited about them. Yeah, so we are here because Kyra and Grace are 20 somethings getting a consultancy business going about helping folks understand neurodivergence. They are both neurodivergent themselves. And we are going to have an absolutely fantastic, unmasked, awesome conversation about what they're doing and why they've chosen to do it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So, who wants to start? Like, I want to know your stories because, like, Grace, even though you and I know each other, I don't think we've ever sat down and been like, connect all the dots, right? It's just one of those natural relationships. And Kyra, you and I are just getting to know each other. So there's background, there's like life that happened before this moment. Whatever you want to share, and whoever wants to go first.
I'll let Kyra go first.
Oh, great. Thank you, Grace. Yeah, I'm Kyra. Oh gosh, where do I start? So I grew up in Plymouth, Wisconsin, small town. I get neurodivergence story kind of started when I was I think I was in like 4K, so 4-year-old kindergarten. And my parents are like, this is a very emotional, hyper child and who can't pay attention to anything. And so we really, my mom's kind of they thought maybe it was anxiety at first, and so they started talking to my doctor. And this was in a time where young girls were, or those presented female at birth, were underdiagnosed significantly. And so this was like early 2000s. And so I luckily had a doctor who had a daughter who was just diagnosed with ADHD, and that kind of like rung a bell. So I was diagnosed, and then as I was kind of going through school, though we knew I had ADHD, no one really knew how to help me, or help kind of guide me through this neurotypical school system, this neurotypical world. So it was really just me kind of trying my best, I guess. And then my mom actually, as we're kind of going through it, she's kind of was going off the checklist when I was going through my diagnosis, and she's like, wow, a lot of these are me. And so at I think 36, she realized she had ADHD as well. So and kind of as I started growing up, learning more about it, I now, as an adult, I'm seeing a lot of my friends are going through that same realization later in life, that they've been neurodivergent their whole life. A lot of things that they weren't necessarily great at, maybe things like organization, maybe they like thrived under the structure of school, because some people do. And then once they got to college, they ended up dropping out of college, or once they got into the workforce, they couldn't they I guess ended not falling apart, but ended up just finding that they didn't fit into that kind of neurotypical system that was set out for them. So I think kind of what led me to be passionate about this was kind of seeing how my story was a little different than so many of my friends, because I just got lucky to some of the people in my life who were able to recognize the signs before, um and we were able to kind of like work with it. And now I am a college graduate. I do have a job that I love, and I'm fairly successful in that sort of sense. So now I kind of want to help other people in any way I can to hopefully find their passions and their strengths, and know that they can be successful in however success looks for them. Yeah.
That's so cool. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I do think a lot of us have gotten to whatever stage we are in life when we discover our neurodivergent identity. But even if it was when we were very little, often people don't really know the best way to help us. And depending on how we respond to not having help that works for us as individuals, people may lose their desire to help us, right?
Yeah.
So if you're talking about an office workplace, somebody who hasn't been helped with emotional regulation, or somebody who is rejection sensitive, or so, right? All of the different things, all of a sudden you're in the adult world and it feels like school all over again, because your colleagues or your managers or whatever are rejecting you just the same.
Mhm.
Right? Because and I'm not somebody who really wants us all to figure out how to do it the typical way. I want us all to figure out how to understand each other.
Yeah.
But regardless where we are right at this moment, if we don't have the right supports, intellectual, emotional, physical, the stuff's really hard. It's just really hard. And so it's cool to hear about your journey, and that journey led you to wanting to help others.
Yeah. And it's like very interesting too. I started in admissions about a year ago, around this time,
College
and
admissions.
college
Yeah.
admissions.
Yeah.
And I found out that so I started at the same time as two of my coworkers, and both of them identify as neurodivergent as well. Both ADHD, one ADHD autism, and we kind of it's been super interesting having these conversations of the fact that like we're on a team and we're like, okay, how can we support each other? And I some days I can just like go into my coworker's office and be like, I am exhausted today. I can probably only give like 40%. And she's like, you know what? That is okay. And so it's really that like we're part of a team. Some days like we can only give 40%, and my coworkers are like, great, we'll pick up the other 60. Like it's
But that's truth, right? You don't have to be
yeah.
neurodivergent to know you come into the office sometimes and you're not okay, right?
Yeah.
Like, I sneezed in the beginning of this because I think moving stuff around in my office to try to make something pleasant looking back there stirred up some dust. I'm very allergic to dust, and so I'm literally like stifling sneezes. My eyes are starting to water, right? Like, I can have a really bad allergy attack and not be, you know, only be there like 40%. There's stuff going on in people's lives all the time, whether you're neurodivergent or you're some other kind of neurotype, right?
Yeah.
But we get taught to hide all of that stuff because somehow humans aren't supposed to be human at work. We're supposed to be intellectual robots,
Yeah.
right? And I think one of the beautiful things that's happening, the more people like the three of us are willing to talk and be, you know, out about our neurodivergence, and then be us, right?
Mhm.
Coming into a meeting and like that. So I feel right now. I'll do my best. But like, and if we have an environment that is willing to have our backs, like you said, okay, we got you. We've got 60% to give. So, but you know, between all of us, maybe we'll eke out some version of, you know, 100% for a single individual. But that's going to be a reality whether we speak up or not. The difference in the realities is going to be how we feel about each other.
Mhm.
Right?
Absolutely.
We're either going to be supportive of one another, or we're going to be possibly mistrusting, not supportive, judgy, feeling let down, right? A whole lot of negative things happen when we try to cover up
Mhm.
and push on. Just because it's the way it's been done by everybody for so long doesn't mean it's a great idea, right? So I love that you
I
have
can definitely relate to that for sure. Like,
yeah, great. I have so many other things that I want to talk about, but I want to hear your story, Grace.
okay. Well, I have to say, my journey was very interesting in finding out that I had autism. I grew up not knowing. I grew up with my mom who was sort of unaware of that, but she treated me a little differently than my brother, knowing that we were two different people. So that's something I really appreciate that she did, because she never made me feel like less than or anything like that. She understood that there was like different support needs there, and like I was never going to understand sarcasm no matter how much she wanted me to understand what she was saying. Like I was never going to get that at all. um, and so I think it really led to a lot of, I would say, some mental health challenges growing up not knowing that I had autism, because it led to me feeling like an alien in a strange land, whereas like everyone else seems to be getting things, like I'm not understanding. I had such a hard time making friends. Like that was near impossible for me growing up. And so I was always like latching on to people, hoping that, oh, we could be friends. And I was just like, maybe they're just tolerating me. Like I could never tell. So it was always like I had a hard time with that for sure. And when I started like working on my own, and I was living in Montana at the time, I was talking to Dawn Marie pretty consistently, just getting like her advice on stuff and just talking about life. And she's like, hey, you know, you really sound autistic to me. And I was like, no, definitely am not autistic. That is not for Grace, you know. And I did some research and I was like, wait a second, a lot of this sounds really familiar. And so I went to a doctor who then who sent me to another doctor in Bozeman who I had to go see, and I got tested, and they're like, yes, you have autism. It's a not super severe. And I'm like, you don't know what severity is, sir. But you know, like it was classified as like a lower version or whatever. And I was like, I really have autism. It was hard for me to believe at first. I was like, no, I was like second guessing everything, and I couldn't tell anyone until I got the paperwork to prove it. And I was just like really paranoid about the whole process. But I really have to thank Dawn Marie for that, because I never would have known if she hadn't pointed that out. And my mom was very understanding. She was super helpful with that whole process. She had to talk to the doctors. They had to get confirmation from a family member about like what I was like going through, my lived experience. And then sort of telling other people has gone well. Some people understand it, some people don't. But I think what I've come to realize is I just have to accept myself. And if other people choose not to be a part of that journey, that's on them. Like that's not my fault. And I think it's helped me just understand myself a lot better. And it's led to me getting in less trouble with certain things, especially at work, when I don't understand like what's going on. And I'm just like being myself, and people are like, what's going on? You know, so it's gotten me out of trouble several times. So yeah.
I love that. And thank you. Thank you for telling everybody I helped. That was very nice. I appreciate that. I relate so much to not understanding the social stuff. And I really have always wanted to, but I had a text conversation yesterday. I was trying to meet somebody. I needed to give them something today. It was very important. And they're going through some stuff. And so I said, thank you. That's very kind of you. And they wrote back, thank you, question mark. I sat there for a really long time. Like, I feel like thank you is appropriate in this situation. Like, I don't know. So I sat there for a while, and then I decided, okay, they know I'm autistic, so I'm just gonna lean in. And I said, well, I'm autistic, so I don't know if thank you question mark is sarcastic. I don't know if you're asking me an actual question about why I said thank you, or if you accidentally hit question mark instead of exclamation point. So I'm going to assume you're asking me a question. Here's the explanation if you're asking me a question. And they wrote back, got it. But that was good, right? It was good for me because one, they didn't want, good for me, right? Somebody else may have needed a lot of reassurance, which I think me a few years ago would have then launched into, why did they just say got it? Right? I would have had a lot of challenges for myself with just that response, but I've done a lot of work on my own emotional well-being to not be as rejection sensitive and not assume everyone on the planet hates me, right? And so I was able to just be like, okay, they said they got it. That's what they mean. Let it be done, right? But there are other situations where maybe that would be hard for me. Even though I've done the work, I still might be like, what if it meant something else, right?
Yeah.
And I think in adult situations, people like me who do much better with verbal explanations, and I'm going to use verbal as communication to mean communication. It doesn't have to be spoken word. So whatever style of communication works for that individual, because not all communication is spoken word. Some kind of confirmation and some kind of reassurance. Even though I've done work on myself, I'm still better served with affirmation and comfort. I just am. Always have been, right? And not everybody enjoys doing that, especially in a professional situation. Don Marie, why, like, get over it. I told you to do a thing, you did a thing. You don't need a cookie, right? Except my emotional well-being kind of does. And I've been shamed and blamed for letting that be known. Like, I don't need a cookie. I don't need to be like, oh, you're the best thing in the world. I just need, I appreciate you did that, or thank you, or you did that well. And if you don't think I did it well, I need you to tell me why, right? I need the detail. And for me, that's affirmation. What do you all think? Like, what in professional or adult relationship settings, maybe before you knew you were either ADHD or autistic or both, what was going a little sideways for you in professional or college situations that maybe you understand a little bit better now?
Yeah, I think for me, this is Kyra won't know who this person is, but we had a meeting when we were both working in the same office in Helena, Montana. And so one of the like higher ups at the office, I had given him a cookie, and he
Like
said,
an actual cookie.
An actual cookie. And he was like, Grace, your grandmother's now going to have to make cookies for the whole office. And I was like, oh God, she's not prepared for that. Like, all these cookies are going to have to be made and like all this stuff. And I was freaking out, and he could clearly see my face was turning beet red. I was like trying to understand what was going on. Because Grace, I was joking. And I was like, oh, thank God. I was so nervous, and so I think for me, I just took stuff so literally, and I didn't, and I would be, my emotions would take over. So like I would hear a sad news story, and I would hear about maybe a youth suicide attempt in Montana. And I was like, my God, our office isn't doing enough about this. Like, we need to do more. And I would go right to the head and the person in charge. And I'd be like, what are we doing about youth suicide in Montana? And I would just like shove it in his face. And he'd be like, that's not under our control. Like, he would go over all this stuff, and I had no understanding of how to regulate my emotions and how not to take stuff literally or understand what sarcasm was happening. And unfortunately that led to me taking everything as passive aggressive, because I can't understand when something actually is passive aggressive. So that's something I actively have to try to figure out every day, if someone's trying to be passive aggressive or not. But I think now, knowing that, I'm not like trying to correct people all the time or trying to give the answers to stuff that's like, I can let that go, you know? So I think that took a while to learn, and I'm glad I figured it out, because I feel like that could have ruined a lot of jobs if I hadn't had known, because now I'm better able to control it. But I'll see what Kyra thinks though.
So I'm going to interrupt just for 1 second, because I think one of the things that is misunderstood about autism is that historically, autism has been marked by deficits instead of by how the brain operates. And one of the deficits that has been misapplied, incorrectly applied to autism, is intellectual deficit. There are those of us who are challenged by intellectual stuff where they struggle with book learning, or they struggle, like I'm dyscalculic, which means I struggle with math concepts. It means some other stuff too. But Grace, how long did it take you to complete a 4-year college degree?
3 years.
Right. And in general, unless you want to be specific, in what range was your GPA?
It's like a 3.92, 3.9, something like that.
All right. So you can be, without intellectual challenge, right, capable of doing your job incredibly well. You're now in grad school. You are working and going to grad school. You're doing like 10 different things. I don't even know when you sleep, if you sleep, right? The amount of stuff you accomplish in a day. You can be all of that, and you cannot know when somebody's joking.
It's been very hard. Like that's been very hard, because I think I missed things growing up. Like I just missed these moments that I just couldn't tap into. And I think that's something I felt a little bad about when I first realized I had autism. But then I was like, you know what? There's nothing I could do about that, you know? And I think people would make comments. They're like, well, just, you have to learn. I can't like retrain my brain. Like that's just not how it works. Like, so, you know.
However, now that you know not only that you are autistic, but that but what autism is. I've got my fidget toy with me here. What autism is, I think you have found ways of learning in relationship to how you are. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I have to thank Kyra though, because when I told her that I had autism, she's like, how did I not see this before? And it was like such an affirming conversation, because she wasn't like, how, when, how did this happen? You know, she's like, oh my gosh, you know, we're in the same boat, you know. And I think that was helpful, because especially during that time of my life when I was in Montana, I felt really alone, because I was the only person out there. No one else in my family lived there, and it was really only Kyra and I, who's the only person I really knew. And so that was a very helpful experience, beside my boss, who was very supportive. Like she completely was helpful throughout the whole process. But I think I have to give a huge shout out to Kyra for that, because she was very understanding when I was like, hey, I have autism.
I think like my reaction was sweet. Just because I saw like how like awesome of like a human you are, like before you telling me you had autism, it like didn't really matter. I knew that you were like a super smart person who knew a lot about a lot of things, and I always like kind of respected that, and I always like loved that you knew a lot about different things. And so like you telling me you had autism, I was just like, sweet, like that makes sense, but cool. Like at least you have like a name for it.
Yeah.
If you want to put a name on it, like
That's so cool. Yeah, so yes, Grace said she wants to hear what you have to say. Me too.
yeah. I guess rejection sensitivity dysphoria is a pain in the butt. But like just to be blunt,
Oh my
It is
God,
like
yeah.
one of those things I never really knew about until I started researching neurodiversity. Like in this especially happened over the pandemic, like all like when we like started researching is when like Grace and I kind of started having these conversations. You know, so in Montana, Grace and I would kind of expand our social circles like I think it was like once a month or once a week we would like meet up for coffee. And it was just kind of like just having conversations about like either things we struggle with or like questioning why things are the way they are. And so I remember like having a lot of conversations about neurodiversity, which kind of made me kind of deep dive a little bit. And I found out that like rejection sensitivity dysphoria was a thing. And I'm like, that's what it's called. And so I kind of through reading more about it, um I think the best analogy I heard for it was someone can give you some constructive criticism, and for a quote unquote normal person, it's just kind of like a slap on the back. But if you have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, it's like a slap on the back, but you have sunburn. It just hurts a little more. And so
Or a lot more.
a lot more, yes. um, something that my boss in Montana at the Office of Commissioner of Higher Education did that I absolutely loved is he gave me a lot of positive feedback. And so whenever I did something correctly, or I just like small stuff, like I booked a flight for because I was also an operations manager. I booked a flight for a conference. He'd be like, thank you for doing that. Even just affirming like glad to have you on this team. Just things like that he would just throw out. And then when it came to like annual reviews, which is something I have traditionally absolutely dreaded, he would tell me straight up, like, if there was anything you're doing wrong, I will tell you about it before that annual review. Like, I'm not keeping anything from you. If something needs to change, I will show you how to do it. Type of situation. So now in this like new job, it was a little like when you're switching jobs, it's always a little bit of an environment change, like kind of figuring out how you can kind of fit in a specific environment. And so when sitting down with my boss, I was able to have that conversation of like, hey, I would really appreciate if we did like weekly meetings so that I know that I'm doing things right and that I know I'm doing things the way they should be, and just kind of getting ahead of things. And with that, I was like, by the way, I have rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Please be nice. And so so she's been awesome with really giving me positive feedback, because while constructive criticism could like hurts a lot, feedback goes miles as well. So it gives me the little dopamine rush I need to keep going, keep doing my job, and really helps me love what I do. So it's been a big learning curve in that way, in the work environment.
That's
I can
awesome.
totally relate to that though. Can I cut in, Donry?
Yeah.
Okay, because so I didn't realize what that was either until I was getting a performance review done, and they were going over all the ways I could improve, and I wanted to start crying. And I was like, this probably isn't normal. Like, for someone to want to start crying when it's like, they were saying good things. They're like, in this way, but could improve in this way. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I was trying to hold back tears, and that was hard. But so now I've sort of realized, like, when I get feedback, I'm like, this isn't about me personally. It's just like I have to keep repeating that to myself. Like, they're not trying to hurt my feelings. They're not trying to make me feel bad. And that sort of helped me with it, but it doesn't get rid of it entirely. So I think that's
Yeah.
something I have
Why
to
don't I exceed expectations?
There's and Grace, I know you're familiar with this. There's a communication theory that I really, really love. It's called nonviolent communication, and Marshall Rosenberg is the one that invented it. And in just super brief, it's the idea that we all have basic needs, but that we generally don't get taught to either identify them. I'm so sorry. My allergies are just like, they have arrived. Fall allergies showed up at the beginning of this video. Okay. So we all have basic needs. We generally don't get taught to identify them, to recognize what might be good for us in terms of filling those needs, or how to ask for help fulfilling those needs. And so a lot of what goes wrong in conversation or communication is some piece of that is going sideways, or all of those things are going sideways, with the addition of what is our expectation of the other person. So, you know, Grace, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I said, hey, would you and Kyra like to do this video? And you said, well, I'll have to check with Kyra. And depending on where my brain is, I might be like, oh, do you not like me? Do you not trust me? Do you not, right? So there have been moments in my life where that's been my response to something as basic and appropriate as I need to check with my business partner, right? Those things come from not only the way our brains are wired kind of from birth, but also from traumas. If we have been shamed and blamed for our natural presentations, behaviors, etc., it will be very difficult for us to learn how to differentiate between something that is helpful, though critical, or mean and critical, because it's critical. And all critical has been our whole lives is ways of making us feel like we're not right somehow. But there are people, so nonviolent communication teaches how to analyze your own thinking, bring forward your request, and be okay no matter what somebody tells you back. Recognizing their agency, really valuing their agency, and that I don't feel like it isn't a personal affront. It's just their truth, right? Or no, I can't. It isn't a personal affront. It's just their truth. But one of the things that I found really amazing was a part of the theory is that saying positive things to somebody can be just as hurtful as saying negative things. So for example, you're talking about, Kyra, your boss giving you positive feedback. If the positive feedback was only good job, you may not know what to do with that, right? Also, if you're me, if you remember the text conversation I mentioned a minute ago, I won't know what good job means. Are you being sarcastic? Are you trying to send me a message subtly? You know, are you glad I did a thing, and what parts of it are you glad about? Like, my inner brain, if people could listen to my insides talking, no one would have guessed I was autistic. Like, it would have been known from early childhood, right? The way I process every single thing that is said out to 1,000,000 miles away from me and back again, if that analogy makes sense, right? I'm just always analyzing meaning. People have gotten very upset with me, like, you're overthinking it, like, it just means what it means. And I'm like, okay, then just tell me what it means if it just means what it means. Like, but people don't know what it is to literally require for your own emotional well-being a certain substantial amount of explanation for things, right? Not everybody who's autistic needs all of that. Not everybody who's autistic is rejection sensitive, right? For some people, not only do they not want to know good job, but they don't want to hear good job. They don't want to, they don't want to really have feedback, period, unless I have totally screwed up and somebody's going to die. Don't talk to me about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is also an autistic way of being, and kind of everything in between, right?
I think that speaks to, though, Dawn Marie, like how it's hard to sort of tell people sometimes. I think in its own way, being neurodivergent is coming out, right? And it's like you're being honest about yourself. And I think for me, I was terrified once I got diagnosed that I wasn't going to get a job, because I was like, because historically, people who are neurodivergent are underemployed or unemployed. And I
Right.
was
In huge numbers.
And I was very concerned that if I was open about being autistic, I was never going to get a job. And when I got my job in Arlington, I sort of had to suss out the situation first to like make sure it was safe. And then once I realized it was safe, I was honest about it. And that helped save me from getting in trouble in certain ways, because I was honest with them. But I think that's something that I've had to communicate, whether it's like through writing or through talking to people, that sometimes it might not be safe to sort of be honest about it, which is really unfortunate. I don't know, Kyra, have you sort of run into that in your neck of the woods over there?
I am learning that, or like I'm still kind of continuously learning how to be upfront about like my ADHD, because you think of ADHD, you think of a hyper little 8-year-old boy. Like that is just kind of like the image that comes into your mind, and it's like oh, this person might not know how to like work in a normal work environment, or kind of like the first like stereotypical thoughts. But in reality, I myself have worked with my brain. I've worked with other people to like learn about myself, and I've become very good with disclosing to my boss of like how I'm feeling about things, how different systems can work for me, and I'm able to kind of adjust different tasks to work in my benefit. Though I know that could be a struggle for other people. As far as just like disclosing in the job search, I don't think I've ever upfront disclosed. Obviously there's like the what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and so I can kind of talk to those types of things, but I've not really been upfront with disclosing of like, hey, I am neurodivergent, like yeah, just kind of like doing that beforehand. I think with my current work environment, no one really knew I had ADHD until I announced that I was doing what's called an S&C talk, which is basically St. Norbert College's version of a TED talk. And so I was like, yeah, I'm doing this on neurodiversity because I have ADHD. Hi. And so it was very much it was great because it straight up opened up a conversation in my office of not just like our coworkers are neurodivergent, but it's also we're bringing in neurodivergent students, and how are we supporting them? And so it kind of led to a bigger conversation because of the fact I work in admissions and where I work and what my job responsibilities are. And so and then because I was doing an S&C talk, I was able to kind of showcase the good parts of ADHD, or at least my ADHD and my experience in ADHD. Like I could talk about how I was not a great student growing up. I had to take Algebra 2 twice. I was bad at math. But once I got to college, I thrived because I was able to study subjects that were interesting to me, and I fell in love with learning. And it really just kind of put a different perspective out there and kind of put a different idea into people's minds of like what ADHD looks like versus that hyper little boy that can't sit still in class that people tend to think about.
And I might be a bit biased here, but she did a great job with her talk.
Oh, yeah.
I watched it. I watched it live. I was like cheering her on the whole time, but like she did a wonderful job.
Thank you so much. And it was like it was super interesting too, because like during that whole talk process, they were saying how they're like from the beginning, they were like, hey guys, you're gonna have to stand in front of a bunch of people and memorize this 8-minute speech. And I'm just like, as someone with a literal processing disorder, I cannot do this. And so it was kind of having that conversation too about accommodating to the person, and just as a whole. I'm like, this is what my talk is about. Would you guys let me have note cards? And so if you kind of like look through the videos on SNC Talks, I'm the only one with note cards, but that's because me as an individual, I needed them. There was no way I could memorize, like even if I did memorize an 8-minute speech, I could not process it in the moment. And so the people I got to work with, the coaches and everything, were great. And it was kind of a learning experience on both ends. So
That's awesome. I think that you probably, whether people will admit it or not, you probably gave some folks some courage. One of the things I learned through a really interesting experience my junior year in high school, actually, I learned that often there are people around you that are not telling you how positively you're impacting their life simply by being you. But if even one person has the courage to kind of show up and be like, thanks for being you, because I need to know people like you exist, right? If one person shows up like that, you can kind of realize, oh, if there's one, there's probably more.
mm-hmm.
And if I have the courage to be myself, whether I ever know about it or not, I'm probably giving somebody else a little bit of courage to be themselves, or I'm at least giving them an opportunity to consider it.
And I think, actually, can I cut in here real quick, because I have something that relates to that, because I gave a talk to a class about sort of autism and some like other mental health stuff. And I could really see one person in the class being like really engaged with what I was saying, and they were like getting reassurance and stuff. And I was like, wow, you know, they didn't say anything to me afterwards, but I could tell they were really engaged with what was being presented. And like that was really affirming, where I was like, you know what, I'm speaking correctly, and this person is getting the information that they want to get. And I think we don't always need to know, but I think, to your point, we are impacting people whether we believe it or not, in good ways, we hope.
I kind of feel like maybe that's why you two decided to start a consulting firm.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about your motivations there?
Do you want to go first, Kyra? Or
Sure.
I can go first if you want, whatever you want to do.
I'm interested to see what you would say, Grace.
Okay, I'll go first.
I think like the whole idea kind of like started with
Yes.
your action.
Yeah, so I think it started with just Kyra and I were meeting up, as she said earlier, for like coffee once a month or like once a week. And we were just sort of saying there's no one in the space that does consulting who's actually neurodivergent, except Dawn Marie, that I've now realized Dawn Marie does consulting too. So like there's very few people who actually do it who have like an authentic voice to it. And we were like, we could maybe fill this space, right? And so I moved to Arlington, Kyra stayed in Montana, and then she came to DC for a work event, and we sat down and we like brainstormed the business name, came up with like a to-do list of what to do. And so it's taken us since like last year, so like maybe like around this time last year, we've built a website. We've had 2 clients currently, and we have some on the way. And then Kyra's working on like the social media angle with video production. And then we're just getting our name out there through doing stuff like video conversations like this. And so I think it just came out of a need. And when I've told people about this, they're like, oh my gosh, like I really wish I had something like this, or this is really helpful to know. Like I was talking to a prospective client recently, and they were like, this is definitely needed. Like we'd love to know this information. And I was like, that's our whole point of doing this. And I think another aspect of the business is sharing neurodiverse stories. So we're going to do that through blogs. And so if anyone watching this wants to write for us, like reach out, let us know on our website. But like, I feel like that's also a big aspect of the business that we want to cover. So does that cover it, Kyra? Is there more that I forgot?
Yeah. I think I kind of was, so I have always had a passion for storytelling. And I think some of the people who have the most interesting stories, at least to me, are those with the who are neurodivergent or identify as so. And as Grace and I were talking, when Grace disclosed that they had like autism to me, I was like, why are so many people recognizing this like so late in life? Grace, my mom, like so many of my friends, even one of my coworkers didn't realize she had ADHD until she got her daughter diagnosed. And so it was the same thing as me and my mom. It's just like so many people are like not learning about their brains until later in life. They're not able to learn about their brains until they fail out of college, until they're fired from their first job. It's one of those things that I've always found super frustrating, because I can look at a person and be like, they have so many strengths. I try to see like the positives in people. Like they're good at so many things. They have so many hobbies, and that is such a cool thing. But no one's really been there to help them kind of like hone those strengths, or maybe their strengths aren't seen as valuable to society. And so I think kind of like doing this will hopefully help. Even if one person sees or is encouraged to look into themselves, or even like learn about their brain, whether they will eventually identify as neurotypical or neurodiverse or not, like everyone has strengths and weaknesses according to this standard that we have set. And I think everyone can learn about their brain. And so I think as long as we can shout into the abyss and one person hears it, I think all this work will be worth it. So I think with the storytelling side of things, that's kind of where I would love to feature some of people's stories of how they learned about their brain and what they did, and maybe like what works for them, in hopes of maybe helping someone else.
And I think just overall, our goal really is just to bring the neurodiverse voice to the table. I just don't want people put in a position where they're at work and they're having maybe a meltdown, or they're just struggling with sensory issues, and for that to be used against them. Like, I just don't want to live in a world anymore that does that to people. And so I think that's my hope as well, is that we can sort of better educate people who are like neurotypical on like, hey, here's some stuff to like look out for. How can you be supportive and not be discriminatory towards other people who may be different?
Yeah, I think I already said this once in this conversation, the more people like the three of us are willing to show up as our unmasked selves, right? Like I have my fidget toy. I get very Wallace and Gromit, if anybody knows what that reference is. I have either no reaction on my face, or like my facial expressions are rather large. If we're willing to just be ourselves and ask others to be willing to understand, right? neurodivergent folks have always been asked to understand those who are not neurodivergent and to accommodate the needs of the non-autistic, non-ADHD, etc. person, right? And I think it's absolutely valid. I just want to expand that to everyone, extend that to everyone, right? Whether somebody's neurodivergent or not, I think us inviting explanations of who we are, how we communicate, how we express and emote, and then being willing to find within us if we have capacity for interacting with that person. It's very real that some of us don't have capacity for each other. And that's true either within the neurodivergent community or in a mixed community, right? Some of us don't have capacity for one another. Or we might be confusing to each other. I can be very confusing because I do seem to, I'm an either on person or I'm an off person, right? I'm either very communicative, very emotive, or I'm neither. And not being very verbal and very expressive does not mean I'm not happy. But if people see all of this and then they see the other, they don't believe that the other can be content, can be at ease, can be enjoying the situation, because I don't look at it in a way that's understandable, right? According to society's rules, at least Western society's rules. Mm-hmm. And so being taught from a young age that there are actually a lot of ways to experience and express oneself and experience and communicate about what's around us. There are a lot of different ways to do that. Yeah, go ahead, Grace.
It's very true. And I think that someone said something really helpful to me recently, and they were like, everyone masks. And I was like, no, everyone doesn't mask. And they're like, no, everyone does, because you're not the exact same person you are with your friends versus your parents. And I'm like, that was helpful for me to learn. It speaks to what you're saying, Dawn Marie, where if we can just allow people to be themselves and no one would have to mask, we wouldn't have a lot of the issues that we do have because people are putting on a persona to fit a certain situation. That can be applicable to many different types of like discrimination that people have to deal with every day, is like because they're being forced to be something they're not, so they're not called out or they're not pointed out and made to feel like an other person. So I think that's definitely something that took me a minute to sort of digest. And I was like, you're right. Like before I knew I had autism, I was still masking, but I didn't have the word for it and I didn't know. And it's like, I think everyone sort of masks in their own way.
Yeah, and we all have our own way of, like, we all have our own sense of humor, right? I may not always understand when somebody's trying to be funny, but not only do I get a lot of the jokes, especially if intellect is involved, right? I can, if there's logic and stuff like that, I get the joke. I think it's hilarious, but also I have a very dark sense of humor. And my sense of humor can use the situation in ways that isn't funny to a lot of people, though neurodivergent people who are similar to me, like we are dying, right? We think it's so freaking funny, not because it's actually funny, right? Like, to use an extreme example, no, I do not believe dead kittens are funny under any circumstances, right? But I'm going to use that as an extreme example. If I made a joke about dead kittens, 99% of the room is going to be like, Dawn Marie, like what? That is so inappropriate. But if there's one other like combination neurodivergent like I am in the room, they're gonna be like, that's hilarious. Not because dead kittens are funny, but because the irony or the darkness or there's some other element that we're laughing at, right? And I think one of the reasons why many neurodivergent people are called out for not being empathetic or not having a sense of humor or not being whatever it is we're supposed to be out there in the world is because it's not that we're not. We do it differently. We do it in ways that are either unexpected or have the stamp of very old, mostly British culture attached to it, right? And that's not to negatively call out Great Britain today, but like old stuff, old ideas about what's correct and not comes from a hierarchical, classist, racist background. And it's baked into our culture.
Mhm.
So I may get told I'm inappropriate, but who made the rule?
Yeah.
Where did it come from? And I think that's one of the things that your work as consultants, my work as a consultant and author and speaker and stuff like that. And Grace, you're authoring as we speak, right? You're working on books.
I'm writing a book. Yeah, writing a book.
Very exciting, very exciting. I think one of the things that we can do, especially if we choose to be more ourselves, right? Not always giving all of ourselves to the entire world. That's not masking, that's choosing what we gift to those around us about ourselves. If I choose not to gift all of my innermost thoughts and feelings, that's a choice. And I should be allowed to have that choice, right? Mm-hmm. If I would like to go into work on a really depression battle kind of day and put a smile on my face, that may technically be masking, but I'm allowed to make that choice for my own well-being, right? If I need to not be asked about what's going on with me, right? Don't bust my chops for masking. So we have to be careful with one another as we promote being ourselves, because once we understand our own difference between masking and our legitimate choice to be lots of different shades of who we are, right? The color spectrum of who we are in any given situation. That's where I think we can feel that we have that safety of personal choice and autonomy and ownership of our agency. And we can be sincere, we can be real, we can be all of those things, right? It's not a black and white thing. You're either all out there or you're masking, right?
Yeah. I think I gave a client presentation recently. We were talking about stimming, and I think that sort of relates to what you're talking about here. And I was like, everyone stims, and they looked at me like, what does that mean? And I was like, well, if you twirl your hair or you tap your foot, you're self-regulating to calm yourself down. And I was stimming like right in front of the whole audience because I rock back and forth when I talk, and I do this without even knowing. And it's like something that I picked up when I was younger, when I was at church and I saw a mom who was rocking her baby back and forth. And my mom was like, oh yeah, you'll do that and it helps the baby. And I was like, wait, so I can do that, And I was like, ever since then, I've just done that. And it's a way for me to self-regulate. And I think our goal sort of here and just with the business in general is for people to realize we're more alike than we are different. That's not to say that there aren't distinct brain differences and distinct ways of being that autistic people with ADHD who are dyslexic have. But I think once we can realize that there's people are more alike than they are different, I think we're better off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so with you on that. I think it gives us the opportunity to value the differences.
Yeah.
Right. If you're talking about building construction, whether you make a square building or a round building or a triangle building, there's certain elements about building that are the same, right? How things stand up. Physics is physics, gravity is gravity, right? There are certain things that are the same. So if you're going to school for architectural engineering, those are the things you have to learn. You have to learn what's the same about building, no matter what shape you put it in, so that anybody who wants to do a shape can do a shape successfully, right? You have your architect come to you and they've had this brilliant idea of all of these weird angles and the dome and that, right? If the architectural engineer doesn't know the rules, the sameness rules, they don't know how or if that building will stand once it's built, right? But if they know the sameness rules, they can create all of this beautiful not sameness in what comes out of those sameness rules, right? And so I do believe that we will value our differences more when we understand some of the things that are similar or the same about every human being on the planet, no matter what your culture is, no matter where you live, no matter how much melanin you have in your skin, what kind of hair or not hair you have, right? Like, I learned a couple of years ago that there's more genetic difference in a flock of identical looking penguins. No, sorry. Yeah. There's more genetic difference in the identical penguins than there is between human beings that look as different from each other as possible. And I found that really fascinating. And people maybe have heard that, the difference between me and any other human being on the planet is so incredibly minute. It's this teeny tiny bit of our genetic makeup. But we act like if somebody's not just like us, there must be something wrong with them. We got brainwashed into that.
Most definitely, yeah.
And I think a lot of autistic people have rejected or resisted that brainwashing. And that's part of what gets us into trouble, right? We don't like hierarchy, a lot of us, right? I mean, if it helps us understand the rules, maybe we do. I get it. You get to say stuff, I have to be obedient, right? Sometimes the hierarchy can give us structure, but that doesn't make that person better than us. And I think we reject that better than or less than piece in general, right? I don't want to speak for every autistic person, but I think there are things about being autistic and being ADHD that cause us to question the status quo.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really exceptional about that. But it can't just be that, right? To Grace's point, find the similarities and then maybe go make something beautifully new.
And I think it's important as well to shout people out for like the good work they're doing. Like I recall, so Kyra is really great at designing things. And so she had designed this like card that she had given to me. And we were at a conference that in Missoula, I'm pretty sure. And so someone was like, "Oh, do you have an example of your work?" And Kyra's like, "I don't have anything on me." And I pulled it out of my notebook. I was like, "Here it is." It's like I showed them the card that Kyra designed. And she was like really shocked. And I was like, "No, I wanted her to know that I appreciated what she had done. And I wanted other people to know too, So I think that's something that I really appreciate with the neurodivergent community is we want to support each other and shout each other out because we're our own best allies in the world today. And so I think that's something I sort of want to change with the business. I want everyone to be an ally of the neurodivergent community instead of just the neurodivergent community supporting one another. So definitely, I think we have to be a part of that.
I agree. I want to talk to you both so much more. I feel like there are topics we could get into. So if you decide you want to come back and do this again, I would love to. Because for one thing, I believe with my whole heart your business is going to be successful. I know you have the intelligence for it, you have the passion for it. You know how to communicate what you need to communicate. So I'm going to be cheering you on and helping you any way I can. And I know you're going to, like, whether you want or need my help or not, you guys are going to do this. And from my experience, there are going to be situations where maybe somebody like us who found out a little later, or your mom, Kyra, found out a little bit later, just found out. And finding out as a later teen or an adult at some point in your life can actually be this really strange combination of, thank God I finally understand myself, and trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It's like all of a sudden, just because everything makes sense doesn't mean it makes sense in a way that makes you happy.
Yeah.
Right? You go back and you look at all the times you were shamed and blamed and nobody helped, or you were, whatever. There can be a lot of trauma in that, and that might come into the workplace. Also, sometimes the advice that's given, if you go into like autism communities online and stuff like that, there's a very valid sense of, don't let people tell you your needs aren't important, right? Stand up for yourself, all of that stuff. And so they go into the work and they're like, I'm autistic and I need this, 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 and this, and you have to give it to me. And the law says, and all of a sudden, a person who felt like a friendly member of the team yesterday feels very combative and angry, and
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden they can't do their job anymore. Like, what happened? You could do your job yesterday. That's that masking thing, right? Like, I might have been doing my job, but I was super suffering, and I learned last evening I didn't have to suffer anymore, so I'm not suffering anymore, right? Like, I would love to talk to you both. We don't have time today, but I would love to talk to you both about, what is it when we come out in a workplace?
Mm-hmm.
And like, one, like, Kyra, you said you don't always disclose first thing, right? Well, somebody watching this might be like, well, then you're being dishonest.
Yeah.
According to the law, no, you are absolutely not. You have every right to not disclose or to disclose, in the exact same way somebody doesn't need to disclose that they may have, I don't know, irritable bowel syndrome or something like that, right? If they need to go to the bathroom 15 times in a day and they get questioned, they may have to say something about, I have a medical condition, but they don't have to say it's irritable bowel, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we're not required to tattle on ourselves as long as we're doing our job, right?
Yep.
If we need help doing our job, I want a world where we still don't have to tattle on ourselves to get help doing our job. That's the world I want, right? But no, you don't have to disclose.
Mm-hmm.
But some of us really want to. I made the decision that no matter what anybody thought, and that's not always a comfortable thing for me, I don't always get happy reactions when I tell somebody I'm autistic. I had a horrible emergency room experience because my husband and I said I was autistic. They misunderstood. I didn't get the proper diagnosis. I was treated badly. I was actually put in danger because of it. So disclosing is still not something that is done easily or successfully. So you're about to go into companies and cheerlead the neurodivergent belonging path, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're going to be neurodivergent people in the company who'd be like, I don't care. It's still not safe.
Mm-hmm.
Or somebody's going to come out and they're going to expect certain things from their colleagues and their bosses that those colleagues and bosses may not be trained for, ready for, or even able to give. And all of a sudden you have a battle at work. So there's a lot to, what is it to be neurodivergent in the workplace? How do we do that safely and successfully? And what are the things that are in our way to doing that safely and successfully? And what might the three of us be able to suggest to employers and employees about how to navigate that together? So if you all want to come back, those are some of the things I'd love for us to think about together, if that sounds good.
And before we close, I just have one last thing to say. I want to say that there's no one else I'd rather be doing this with than Kyra. So I think it's great to be working with them on this. I think we can definitely, to your point, Don Marie, make a meaningful change. And I think that's our goal, whether it's one person or 100 people. anything that we can do to better support the community that we're in, I think is our goal. So Kyra, is there anything you want to say, or are we good for the day?
I'd say ditto. I think you said it perfectly great.
Ditto. What they said.
But no, I couldn't say it more beautifully. Yeah, I'm all about people learning about their brains, and even if they don't put a label on it, it's always helpful just to know about yourself. So
I agree. Well, thank you both. This has been such a joy.
this is fun.
I do hope we get to do it again, and I'll make sure that your business name and link to your website is available in the information below the video. And yeah, I can't wait to see the good stuff the two of you are going to do together.
Thank you so much, Don Marie.
You're welcome.